All right. Welcome to the Mormon Newscast. It is August 4th, 2025. Those folks of you that are watching on YouTube, we have a live studio audience here. Would you please give us a round of applause? To the YouTube audience.
You know that's real too because it fades off.
Yeah.
So just go.
It's not like the normal one we use.
Right, like the canned one.
That sounded real. Also, for the YouTube audience, as you're listening, we're going to need some feedback from you guys in terms of the sound quality. We know that the studio audience here is getting the sound, but we want to make sure that you're getting it as well. And so if you have any issues at all, please put them in the live chat all throughout the night. And for the studio audience, when you do come up to ask a question, if you want to remain anonymous, you're welcome to do that. Just don't state a name. Come up. The camera's only going to be on us. If you want to say your name, you're more than welcome to state a question during the news show. So everybody, welcome to the Mormon Newscast. We're going to start with our lead story tonight. I am Bill Reel. I'm joined by my colleagues, Radio Free Mormon and Rebecca Biblioteca. Please, a round of applause for the two of them. And our first story tonight is out of Bisbee, Arizona. I'm going to turn the time over to Radio Free Mormon, and he'll bring that story to us.
Thank you so much, Bill Reel. Good news and bad news is I've got no slides for tonight, so I'm just going to tell you about this story that just broke a few days ago. Bisbee, Arizona. How many here are familiar with the horrible child abuse case in which the church was involved in the cover-up in Bisbee, Arizona? I know it's not something you want to applaud, is it? So people are just out there raising hands. Yeah, so what happened, the fundamental underlying cause of action in this child abuse case and why it is that the church is involved is that down in Bisbee, Arizona, there is a ward, and that ward had a bishop, and that ward also had a child molester. And really, unfortunately and horribly, he was molesting his own little daughter. And we're talking about just a few years of age, not that old. And he goes in and he talks to his bishop and ends up confessing to his bishop. And the bishop then does what every bishop is supposed to do, which is to call the hotline number in Salt Lake City to talk to the church lawyers to find out what it is that this bishop is supposed to do under the law. And he did that. And what happened is that he got a hold of this attorney on the other end who looked up the law in Arizona. And the law, by the way, I'm presuming he looked up the law in Arizona, all right? But what this attorney on behalf of the church tells this bishop in Bisbee, Arizona is that, well, first off, the law says in Arizona that if you're in a situation where you receive a confession in a confession, atmosphere like the bishop received it in, the bishop has the option. The bishop can report this to law enforcement and be within the law, or the bishop cannot report it to law enforcement and still be in the law. Every state is different, and that's why they have this hotline, so you can call the smart attorneys in Salt Lake City who represent the church and find out what it is you should do. Well, for whatever reason, the bishop on the other end of the hotline, whether he read the law or not, advised the bishop, do not report this. The law is that you cannot report this, which, as if you've been paying attention, is actually a gross mischaracterization of the law in Arizona, which gives the option to the bishop. But the lawyer on behalf of the church said, no, you cannot report this. And not only that, if you did report this, then you have to understand that there's a lawsuit in the offing one way or the other, no matter what it is you choose to do. There's certainly the possibility of a lawsuit from one angle or another. But if you do not follow the church's advice, which I am giving you, good bishop, you will stand alone in any lawsuit. Only if you do what we tell you to do will the church indemnify you and represent you. So the bishop did not report this to law enforcement based upon that advice and implicit threat. This was not just one bishop, this was two bishops, because this went on for a period of time. And not only that, there was a new child born into the house, another little girl, who, because the first bishop did not report, ended up becoming abused along with her sister by her father. And this went on for a number of years. It would not have happened at all with the second girl if it had been reported at first. And it would have stopped sooner for the first daughter if it had been reported when it could have been reported. The only thing that makes this even worse is that the bishop was the children's doctor, a pediatrician, who in order, okay, I'm not trying to slander this guy, but it seems to me that in order to follow what the church told him to do from Salt Lake, he had to violate his oath as a physician. Not just as a human being, but also as a physician. And so another bishop comes in. What ends up happening is that eventually they file a lawsuit against the church. And I think the reason is probably pretty obvious to everybody. Well, it went to the trial court level and it got dismissed. And what the trial court judge said was there was no obligation of the bishop to report this to law enforcement, which I guess is true under the Arizona law, right? But therefore, the case was dismissed. This was 2 to 3 years ago now. Things take a long time in the judicial system. And an appeal was taken by the plaintiffs to the Court of Appeals, and they issued their ruling just a few days ago, which reversed the trial court's ruling of dismissal and reinstated the case and said this case is going to go forward. Now you can applaud if you like. All right, well, in the law, forward is not always forward. Sometimes it's up, down, and sideways. So we're going to have to see what happens because, of course, that's the Court of Appeals. And now the church is going to want to appeal this ruling by the Court of Appeals to the Arizona State Supreme Court. The question is whether the Arizona Supreme Court will accept the appeal. The Supreme Court does not have to accept an appeal. You only get one appeal as a matter of right. A second appeal is a matter of grace from the courts. If they want to hear it, they'll hear it. If they don't, then they'll tell you they don't. And obviously, of all the people who go appealing their cases to the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court has the ability to hear only a third or less of them. So if the Supreme Court is satisfied with the ruling from the Court of Appeals, the Supreme Court of Arizona may just say, nope, we're going to deny your request for an appeal and just let what the Court of Appeals say stay. But that's going to take some time to find out. And if the Supreme Court does accept review, then it's going to take more time to go through this process, which took already 2 to 3 years just to get through the Court of Appeals, right? So these are the wheels of justice that are famous for grinding slow, but extremely slow. That's one of those sayings I made up as an attorney. One of the main reasons, by the way, do you have any questions over here? Anybody, any comments? Bill or Rebecca?
I have one comment.
Yeah.
Really quick. Oops. Where's the deacon to run this back and forth, right? We need that up here.
Any deacons out there?
No, I just have noticed that people did not even think this was possible. They thought it was over. They thought it was done. I don't think anybody really followed that it was going through, a potential appeal process. So when I've been posting about this and seeing reactions, people are almost elated that there's another chance because it was so devastating when that other ruling came down that said, no, it doesn't matter, nothing, And the other thing I've noticed about what people are saying is just honestly, when is the LDS Church on the side of a victim? Never. They're always doing this, appealing, trying to make it go away, siding with the person who didn't help the children. So overall, people are just really watching and feeling positive because a lot of us thought, oh, that's over. There's no second chance. So we're excited and we're glad you're telling us more of the details are available.
Thank you very much. Just doing a little Ray Charles there for a second. Somebody on YouTube says they want to see my beautiful blues. So there you are, chairman of the board. Let's talk a little bit about why this thing got reversed, okay? It has to do with the nature of what is confidential and what is not. And these are things that lawyers are supposed to know about. I was surprised that the trial court level dismissed the case because of the issues involved. And there's two main issues involved, which have to do with whether this disclosure or disclosures by the defendant, who since deceased, by the way, he killed himself when he was in jail. So this is reduced. There's no criminal trial in the offing. This is a civil case now against the LDS Church. If I take Bill Reel by myself into the bathroom and make sure we check, like you've never done anything like that before, Bill, don't look at me like that. Or my office. We can make it my office because that's usually where it is.
That's better.
He comes up to my office, we go in there, we close the door, we sit down, there's nobody else in the office, and we talk about his case, and he tells me all the horrible things that he's done. Now, this is attorney-client privilege, right? But there's a lot of similarities in the different privileges. It's not identical, but for this one it is. Now, if he comes in there, and he's gotten in trouble with the law, and I'm sorry, I was gonna say your mom, but I know she's passed away. But a parent or a relative of his has paid me to represent him. And they want to sit in on the meeting, okay? And maybe they know all this stuff that you've already done, or you've already told them, but they want to be there because they feel entitled, which you have to squash that at the very beginning, okay? Because just because you paid doesn't mean that you're my client. Bill is my client. Nobody else in the world is my client in this. So if Bill goes in there and tells me stuff by himself, that is attorney-client privilege, which means I cannot talk about that to anyone. And I certainly cannot be called upon or subpoenaed to testify in a court of law because attorney-client privilege is absolute. As long as there's a privilege. And that's where we go back to Bill and I being alone, wherever it might be. If he brings a relative in, if there's anybody else who just happens to be in there and listens to what we talk about, that is not privileged because it was not confidential. Does that make sense? There's two things that happened here, which I believe I knew about originally, which is why I was surprised it was dismissed, which is the first that the guy, his name's Paul Adams, I think, might have written a book about hitchhikers or something. Is that right? No, different Paul. Okay.
Different Paul.
Different one. So he goes and he talks to the bishop, and at some point he's in there talking to the bishop while his wife is present. That vitiates the privilege. There was no privilege, all right? And it doesn't make any difference if Bill tells me I did ABC by himself, and it is privileged. And then we have another meeting the following week, and his wife comes in, and he tells me the same thing in front of his wife. It doesn't make any difference if he told his wife 100 times the same stuff. If she's there in the office with him, what he tells me is not privileged because it's not confidential. And that's why there's a privilege. Only things that are said in confidence. Have I beaten this horse enough? Well, those were the facts. She was there for at least one of these sessions with the bishop when her husband was spilling his guts about all this stuff. So there's no privilege there. So I'm surprised it got dismissed. And the Court of Appeals rectified that with their ruling. The second thing has to do, I believe, with the entire, the court martial is what I'm thinking of, the court of love, the disciplinary council that I believe this fellow went through as I was reading through. And when you go through a disciplinary council, it's very different from confessing to a Catholic priest. And all this stems from Catholic priests in the confessional. That's where this was all created. This priest penitent privilege, which is what it was called in law school when I took the course in constitutional law back in the 1980s. Everything else stems from that. So it's kind of like if what the Mormon Church does in a confessional proceeding is similar enough to what the Catholics do, where it's very confidential, right? And if it's part of the repentance process and the bishop is acting like a bishop, okay, we'll call that good. The problem is this isn't just talking to a bishop, this is talking to a room full of people like you. And you got, I don't know, 12 members of the High Council. I don't know if you had the whole thing, the whole deal, but you got the 3 members of the First Presidency. I believe it was a High Council. You got a clerk in there. You know, people walking by on the street might come in and just sit down and see what's going on in the LDS Church. But now it starts to look more and more like something that's not confidential. And you might say, well, is it confidential amongst the 15 people plus the clerk? I don't know, especially that clerk. Because you're not really confessing anymore, okay? So those are the 2 reasons that it was reversed and it's going to proceed, because those are part of the fact pattern, and the Court of Appeals at least saw things in a way that I think is more harmonious with the actual law relating to the client, not the client, the priest penitent privilege. I was gonna ask if there are any questions. We're all together. I don't usually get to ask this. You know, I'm usually just looking at a wall that's about right there where this person's hand is, if not closer. Yes.
The Court of Appeals addressed the issue of the nature of the court martial.
I heard everything about the Court of Appeals addressed the issue of the window washer.
No, the nature of proceeding for the court martial.
Oh, the Court of Love. I'm not exactly sure. Honestly, I have been so sick for the last 48 hours. Of all the bad things, I'm convinced that Brigham Young did. He did a lot of bad things. The worst thing he did was he did not keep going. And I will never forgive him for that. I don't know if it's elevation sickness, but whatever it is, I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. So I have not had a chance to read the full opinion, even though I did ask Colby if he would send it to me. I don't think he did, but you know, that's my bad. So I'm not sure, but probably. I read about it, but not the actual opinion. So that's about all I have to say. Were there any other questions? There's one way back there. Is that Makepeace? Well,
if the church finds out that by having this court of love, that they've lost their priest penitent privilege, might they stop doing these courts of love for certain types of cases?
well, they certainly should. And I think they will, because they do respond to things in the outside. Kind of like the Book of Mormon is a remarkably responsive book to its own environment in which it's being created. And it's like, oh, 3 witnesses, okay, and all these other things. And Joseph Smith's dad's dream is in there too. So the church is also very responsive. In fact, I think, how many of you are aware of the fact that it used to be when you went in front of your state president and the High Council, that all the High Council members were there and they had to be there? How many are aware that that got changed a couple of years ago to where the state president can do it just with his counselors and not bother everybody else to attend? Okay, you know why that happened? Because of Bill Reel. I call that, I forget what I call it, but it was like the Bill Reel Amendment. Because you know what happened with him? He got excommunicated when they had to bring all 12 of the High Councilmen in. And there's an old poster that says, everything I learned from Star Trek. Do not put all of your ranking officers in the same shuttlecraft. And it's really a bad idea to put all your best stake leaders in the same room with Bill Reel and give Bill Reel 45 minutes to say whatever he wants, and they've got to listen. And that's why I think they changed it. And that's it from here. Back to you, Bill.
You said you had something you wanted to say about that story?
Yeah, I just have one comment, and this is my thought when RFM detailed everybody that would have been in that room and aware of the abuse. And we're talking 15 men, we're talking counselors, we're talking bishops. We all know how it works, probably their spouses. It's just unconscionable to me that that number of people, maybe numbering over 20, knew what was happening. I mean, it almost makes me tear up. Knew what was happening in that home. And nobody thought, screw the rules, screw reporting. I need to help these children. No one did that. And that is being church broke. That is high demand, high control, that you override just your natural instinct to protect the innocent and vulnerable, and none of those people did it. So I'm sorry, it makes me sick.
Can I see this for just a second, Bill? All right. Don't hit that board, okay? Thank you. That'd be really bad, huh?
It would.
By the way, for any of you who haven't followed the story, you might be saying, well, how did they ever catch this guy?
Yeah.
Okay. If you don't know, I'll tell you, they caught him because he was taking pictures of his daughters and putting them up on the dark web, on the internet. I think they found him was it in New Zealand?
Yeah, it was in New Zealand. A police officer found pictures on a
computer.
And they've got a process that allows you to look at the digital file and compare it across the world. They've got a very sophisticated network of tracking down these children. And this particular video file, did not come up in the registry, and so they searched and they managed to find these people.
In Arizona, from New Zealand, after years. And it led him right to this fellow, Paul Adams, and they arrested him. Years after it should have stopped and would have stopped if it had been reported when it was first talked about to the bishop.
But the pictures are still out there, and so are the videos. The pictures and videos still exist. There's no way to get those back.
Sure.
So, we're not talking just abuse. We're talking horrific abuse. Don't even Google it. You don't want to know.
And just to the YouTube audience, the one question that came in that you were asking in the chat about what it was that was asked, the question was asked that if a LDS disciplinary council is far removed from looking like a Catholic confession, might the church change the procedure of having a disciplinary council, knowing that in certain situations it would not serve as a confession and anything there would hold those men accountable for not reporting it? And so that was the question. For the audience, both here and on YouTube, you would think that would be enough LDS abuse, but unfortunately in the Mormon church, you run the potential of having multiple abuse stories in 1 week. And so we have a couple of others. One of them here is elderly West Jordan man arrested, accused of sexually abusing young girl. And this is an older man in his 80s. He is asking children in the neighborhood if they want to come into his home. He has candy for them. Multiple kids are known to have gone into the home. At this point, so far, we have one child who's accusing him. He kisses her. He touches her inappropriately. And so now he's been charged with abuse. She told her mom. I don't know the hesitation, and I don't judge these situations because I think they're difficult at times sort of for a parent to figure out, but it took the parent 3 days before they called authorities, and the man was arrested and charged. But the issue with this story, as we were talking behind the scenes about this story, it seems like the news reports, KSL, who, if I'm not mistaken, is owned by the church, KSL wants to report it as investigators also called Jones, quote, an influential member of his church, and police, and told police that children come to his house often where he provides them with candy, according to the affidavit. KSL doesn't even want to say the church's name. And in a church that has so many safe spaces for abusers, I'll just note, evidence, I think, lends a ton of credibility that the church was founded by a child abuser and that it's been a safe space for child abuse all the way up to the present moment. And that when news articles from church-owned media reports on instances of abuse and doesn't name the church, that to me seems so obvious. And it says so much, because if you're a faith that is accountable to such things, you say my church's name, because I want everyone who's in West Jordan who goes to possibly this ward or stake to be able to talk to their kids and have a conversation to ensure that this person didn't abuse them. And when you're accountable to such things, you have no problem with the institution with which you're a part of being mentioned, because your job, your priority is to root out abuse from any angle that you possibly can. And so I just want to note that we've run into this several times. We've talked about this in the past, that when the church media reports on abuse instances, often they leave the name of the church completely out.
Can I make one comment on that?
She knows her callings.
Yeah, it was sorry about that. I thought when I read that, okay, well, maybe they don't know what church it is. And so then, of course, when you report that, you don't mention what church it is. You say a church. However, when I looked at the police report, it clearly says an influential member of the LDS church. So the news outlet made the conscious decision not to warn people and to say LDS. Were you going to talk about the other convictions, Bill, or do you want me to do that?
Please.
Okay, so also in the same KSL report, it said that back in 1990, he had been convicted. Now that's different from arrest. RFM pointed that out to me. He was convicted of sexual solicitation. It said that in the KSL article. In the news report, it said not only that, but again in 1995, he was convicted of sexual solicitation. Now this is interesting because I looked up his LDS resume. He's been a bishop several times. He's been a stake president. After those two convictions for sexual solicitation, he continued in his prominent callings, even being a counselor in the Palmyra Temple, and then executive secretary, counselor in the stake. So I just want to know who's watching this store. We know there's no discernment, but come on, there's got to be a person that, you know, I mean, think about it. Your church record, if you're a member of the LGBTQ community, you have a stamp on there so they can watch you. Where's the stamp for a man like this? And we don't know how many victims there could be. So everything this week made me mad. Let's just say that. There was a lot of things that really were very disturbing. So.
Consider the irony that when a man like Sam Young fights for children, that the church be responsible to put two adults in the room with a child so as to lower significantly the statistical chance that they're abused, Sam Young is excommunicated. And when a man is found guilty of sexual solicitation of a child, that person is allowed to continue to serve in high church callings, which gives them the perception to the congregation and the other children in that ward or stake or temple area that that person is righteous, temple worthy, talks to God, and is representing the Lord in every interaction that is happening within a church space. And when you recognize that this church excommunicates a certain kind of person and promotes the other, I think all of us should have our eyebrows raised. The third thing, and are there any questions about that case? The third thing, I'm going to put this up on the screen here for the YouTube audience, but you guys won't see this. The church came forward with a new article this week, Protecting Children and Youth. And it's got the same sort of animation that their polygamy cartoon had. But it's a new article that the church is trying to portray to its members that it's the gold standard and its priority is protecting children. I want to note just two things. There's one part of this page that says key principles and policies covered in the training, and I'll just read these really quick. The Lord expects us to do all we can to prevent abuse and protect and help those who have been victims of abuse. I'll just note, caveat, except we don't really want to do any serious thing that will actually stop abuse with children. How easy would it be that when your kid goes in at 7 years old on up, 7 because you're being interviewed for baptism, and they happen before that too. Primary kids are constantly being asked to go in and sit down with the bishop so that they build a relationship with bishops so they learn to trust them and build some sort of trusting relationship as their religious leader. I find it strange that the church continually fights in its articulation of protecting victims. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, it refuses. It goes screaming, scratching, and clawing to make any actual change that protects children.
That really can't be true, because look at the second one.
Yeah, the second one, the church does not tolerate abuse in any form. Abuse violates the laws of God and may also be a violation of the laws of society. Here's the problem. More often than not, it's the opposite. Abuse violates the laws of society and may also be a violation of the laws of God. That's the way the church operates. Next, when adults are teaching children or youth in church settings, at least 2 responsible adults should be present, except in instances where we don't want that to be the case. So they're contradicting themselves again. At least 2 adults must be present at all church activities attended by children and youth. Avoid extended one-on-one communication with children. And again, I'm missing part of it because of the comments here on top of that. But it's regularly communicate with parents or guardians with any concerns about the child. The church doesn't follow its own rules. The other thing I want to note here, because I think this is at least a bit strange, when appropriate, this is one of the sections, when inappropriate behavior or abuse happens, you should act promptly to protect the children or youth. In the US and Canada, if you learn of abuse, you should immediately contact legal authorities. You should also counsel with your bishop or stake president, who will call the abuse helpline for guidance in helping victims and in meeting reporting requirements. It is such a strange thing that on one hand, the church is saying, if you learn of any abuse, immediately contact the authorities. And then when rubber meets the road, they do the opposite, which is bishops call the helpline first. And in instances where you can or may not report, we are going to almost exclusively tell you not to report to authorities. And I think that irony also stands out significantly. We are, by we, I mean all of you, us, and all the other content creators that are out there. We're going to continue to hammer the church on this because they could easily make a dozen simple changes that would significantly reduce safe spaces for abusers to abuse children. And these cases happen, as we just had 2 this week that we're updating you on. These cases are going to continue to happen until this church takes abuse seriously. Any comments from either of you, and also any questions from the audience?
I was just going to say that I'm thankful that the church is so devoted to making sure that no abuse happens, that when there are events such as girls' camp, where all that's there is girls and women, the church wants to make sure that there are men there too, just so everybody's safe.
I had a comment
That
about
is strange, huh?
Yeah, I don't know if you guys remember Dr. David Farley, the gynecologist who abused and over 200 girls in, through his profession, but they trusted him because, they were in his stake and in his ward and he was in callings. He also somehow was always the person that would go to girls' camp and make sure that they were safe. So yeah, this is Dr. David Farley, and I just thought of another case that I just, information, yes.
Has he been convicted?
I have to say alleged.
It would be good to avoid a lawsuit.
Alleged, there you go. We can't have the newscast have a lawsuit, that's exactly right. Anyway, but that was in the news, that he was at girls' camp. So speaking of actually convicted though, there were 100 abuse cases in California. Do you guys remember this? Against the LDS Church, 100. Remember that was one of our headlines on our thumbnail? Well, those are all being dismissed and stayed, which leaves everybody to believe that the church is settling. So 100 cases in one area in California. That's a lot.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
There.
Question, RFF. In your professional opinion, is the helpline an attempt to add a layer of attorney-client privilege on top of priest-penitent?
Yes. Absolutely. And it really seems from everything that I have observed, which certainly isn't every call into the hotline, but everyone I've read about, looks like the lawyers at the other end, their purpose is not to help out victims. Their purpose is to protect the church.
I
Yes.
have a quick comment. Your mics are working. If you would turn them on, some of the audience at home is having trouble hearing you.
Try your mics.
Do do do.
This.
Test, test.
You'll have to adjust a little bit there. But yeah, get right like 1 inch away from those mics up there.
Test, test, test.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Are you hearing me?
Test, test,
Someone's
test.
hearing me. Some people are hearing me. All right.
Anybody hear me?
You gotta turn right on the, like this in the microphone.
Can anybody hear me now? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let me try to scoot in here. Okay, like that. How come they don't have to be so close? Why is it only me? All right. Need to get lipstick on the mic. Is this really how close I have to talk, like this? Honestly, it's kind of cramping my style as far as like being able to read my notes.
They're saying they can only hear you through Bill's mic. So everybody else on YouTube can only hear Bill and nobody else.
Really? On YouTube, they can only hear through this mic?
Okay.
They were saying earlier that the sound was good, so I don't know if it's something that happened some part way through or what.
So your mic's working, Bill, but they're not translating to YouTube.
So this is not working as far as the at-home audience.
Gotcha. We'll do the best we can here. So I just want to note, by the way, there's a lot of irony in all of these abuse instances, but another irony is, why does the church seem more willing to pay out on the back end of these cases rather than just put some really simple changes in on the front end to prevent the abuse in the first case? So there's that. The next story that we've got, by the way, any other question? Yes, please. Yep.
Okay. Carolyn McConkey's client is the church. It is not the abused party or their parents. Number two, Rebecca or one of you, would you like to speak to the new podcast, Architecture of Abuse, which everyone should be listening to?
I do want to just note that to the audience on YouTube, Martine was just stating that Curtin and McConkey, when the helpline is called, their priority, their attorney-client privilege priority, the person who's paying them, the person who they're representing is the church, and it is not the victim in any of these instances. Anything they do to help the victim is a secondary thing past their main priority, which is protecting the quote-unquote good name of the church. Do you know much about the architecture of?
I have not had a chance to listen yet, but you've listened to all of it, haven't you, Martine?
I listened to that.
Yeah, no,
But I did go to most of the presentations.
yeah. And that Sunstone presentation will be available, I think, in a month or so. So everybody should, couple weeks, yeah, should look that up because that's incredible. I don't know exactly who's on it except for Alyssa and who else, Martine?
Tim Kosnoff.
Tim Kosanoff, that's right.
Tim Kosnoff
Okay.
approached Lindsay
Right.
of Sunstone to create this podcast. And it is mind blowing. If you don't know anything about how the church operates, how the
So it seems like it's mixed results.
it's still mind blowing, just like.
Yeah, and I think Ganesh, you've listened to most of it. You can probably speak about it too. But the architecture of abuse is what we're talking about, and it does go into details of how everything works behind the scenes.
So we had in New Zealand a New Zealand Herald podcast called Heaven's Helpline that talked about the abuse helpline, and Tim and Kosnoff and Elizabeth Redfield took that further with regard to the architecture of abuse that they have done, and they've done several episodes, along with a number of people that we are well familiar with, people like Natasha Hoffa and Julie Hanks. as well. So it's some really beautiful work there, hard-hitting, but something that they may, all members of the church listen to, because this is everybody's problem and certainly needs to be addressed.
And I think that the name of the podcast is so brilliantly chosen, which is, I think it was Martine, you were talking to me there at Sunstone, that the idea that safe spaces for abuse are within the architecture of the church, that the church would have to change its building blocks in order to create spaces that are the opposite of being safe for abuse. Yeah.
If you're thinking, oh, I just can't do another podcast, there's only 8 episodes for this season 1. So they're an hour each, we can all handle that. And then there will be, season 2. These, they recorded in January and then they released a couple months ago, so.
Excellent. So please check that out.
Can I ask a question?
Mhm.
Maybe one of you guys know more than I do about this. But are there ever background checks done when someone is called to work with children, to be a leader?
In the UK,
Or any of those?
I can answer that, and the answer is no, except in Australia, where the Australian law requires that, and the church comes up to that level of responsibility, but it does not do that anywhere else in the world.
The UK.
Yeah, I think it is Australia and the UK.
Yeah,
Uh,
that was a big thing, Nemo and.
The people there push for it.
Gotcha.
Right. When it's legally required by a country, then the church will do it, but only when it's legally required by an outside entity. They don't, take it upon themselves to say, hey, let's make these kids safe. So, and like you said, Bill, there's so many easy steps, simple hacks that they could use to do this.
One would be that if you're found guilty of sexual solicitation of a child, you don't serve in any priesthood calling ever again for the rest of your life. That would be a simple one.
Rebecca, I was going to say that the attorneys for that 100 case out of California, they came on, I think it was Mormon
Yeah.
and Mormons, and they weren't all out of California, they were across the United States. And the law firm from California went to court, and there's some, sure Arthur can speak to this, but they found that they proved that these cases were close enough that they could all try them as one, instead of the church being able to go after or try to defend against each one individually. And then it ended up in California. They said that they weren't going to settle no matter what. Unfortunately, it looks like no is going to win out on that one. So.
Yeah. No, and I feel like as soon as people figure out, honestly, we've seen these ads cropping up, right, that say, have you been abused by the LDS Church? It's different from, say, a Catholic diocese. If you remember the movie Spotlight, right, Michael Resendez, if you are abused in a certain Catholic diocese, you sue that particular entity. And then when there's no more money, there's no more money. But the LDS Church is a corporation soul. There's only one person and extremely deep pockets. And so I feel like you see these ads now, maybe some lawyers are figuring this out. And as they're looking at California, and I'm aware of some of the individual people that are involved in this. And, they're talking about decades old abuse, like decades. And they're coming forward now saying that wasn't right. And they're getting settlements. So I don't know. I think we'll see more.
And all across the country. That's the tricky part.
Yep.
This is 100 cases with the lawsuit.
Another irony, you can bet your ass that at some point, getting up high enough, and at least the top 15, that before you're called into those groups, there's background checks done. They would want to be sure that they nip in the bud any possibility that something like this would happen at that level. And so they're more than happy to do the background checks at some point, at some level height. But for the local wards, which is where the biggest risk of abuse occurs in a church that has $265 billion, they, in fact, for whatever reason, don't seem to do that except where it's legally required.
I think a lot of people might be unaware of what normal churches do. One, they have glass doors, they have glass walls. The kids get a wristband when they go in. There's 2 leadership. There are background checks mandatory every year, not just once. And if your kid has to go to the restroom, they text the parent to come in. And they have cameras in every room. That's just normal protocol in a normal church.
And those are in churches that don't have $265 billion to spend.
And they manage to do all that.
Yeah. Churches that are not the only true and living church with which the Lord's well pleased. So, our next story, by the way, we did a segment a few weeks ago on media influencers. And one of the media influencers speaking about how the church was putting out offers to pay people to put out content. And so there's been an update on that story, and to bring you that is Rebecca Biblioteca.
Thank you. And am I using the right mic? Those that are, we're not using these, right? We're using this. Okay, nobody's given me any eye or look, so I don't know. I'm just going to talk. And well, okay, now I'm getting it. Okay. All right. So yeah, now that we've covered that for an hour, let's find out why the church thinks everybody wants to join it. Oh my goodness. So I will also say that if you are not recognizing me either here or in the at-home audience because I don't have my 40 ring lights or my reading glasses because I can't wear them with my headphones. It is me, it is Rebecca, so I am here. So yeah, Bill is correct. We did talk about this before. There was an influencer who was no longer LDS, although she does her own kind of content, and she was contacted about a month ago by a media company representing the LDS Church to see if she could put together some content. And of course, we were very interested to see what this press pack that they gave her looked like, because it detailed, you know, the kind of things that they wanted her to say and also not say. So since then, a lot of faithful influencers have spoken up about this idea of the church paying for content. And it's interesting because as they speak about it, they go, of course they pay. They're trying to defend, but they're almost damning themselves by saying what they're saying. It actually was an article in the Tribune just last week, so they finally picked up on it. So the interesting thing is that the influencer who originally got this offer, she has since made another video, which was much more mellow and sort of excusing the church, in which she said that a representative from the church called her, said they never should have reached out to you. It was a new media company that we're working with. And of course, we're trying to find people that are LDS to create these videos, but you did not go through the proper vetting process. And she said in her video that vetting process involves calling someone's bishop to make sure that they're, you know, in line and that they're going to give the kind of content that is needed. So her second video is definitely, you know, a little more party line. But I think everybody is missing the point here. And some of these things that some of these faithful influencers said in defense of this is, I don't know, actually kind of hilarious to me. Let me see if I can read these here. Oh my goodness. So we have a person named Derek Westra, who is the director of reputation management. That is actually a department at the church, reputation
You need
management.
that, don't you?
Yeah, I feel like he's got a lot of work to do a lot of the time. But he says, of course, marketing and advertising agencies outreach, you know, to people to create campaigns and, you know, media offerings like The World, right? Remember that, or Meet the Mormons. And he says that his team vets individuals and content creators. I thought this was very interesting, to ensure that they remain Latter-day Saints and produce material that aligns with the faith's value. How do you ensure that someone remains a Latter-day Saint? I can think of Satan in the temple, right? Our friend, he just left, right? So he did not remain LDS, but apparently they really want to vet these content creators and make sure that they are going to stay. So let me see here. Okay, so what they basically do is they want to take an influencer who has their own following, who knows how to make content, and they want to help them carefully craft what they're going to say. And everybody who was a faithful influencer was like, of course you should be paid for your content. And I agree with that. And I don't think that we were all too surprised that the church pays content creators. I think we kind of knew that. We've seen times where they're invited to temple open houses ahead of everybody else. And then they're supposed to post things about how wonderful, the temple open house is. So I think everybody got it wrong as far as what we are all concerned about or thinking about. And what we are talking about is that press packet. Wouldn't you agree? It's not that they're paid. That's okay. We understand that. It's the fact that there was a glimpse behind the scenes at what the church wants them to say and what they want them not to say. In fact, one of my favorite lines from this article is a gentleman named, let me get over here. Hold on, it's much harder to read my notes. Okay. What's his first name? Is it David Snell? I can't find his first name on here. But he is a content creator who they interviewed about this process. And he said, oh yeah, the church pays me, it's all fine. But his last line that he said is, the church pays content creators for their work, but not their witness. Let me say that again. Of course, they pay us for our work, but not our witness. Well, I'm sorry, but if you're an influencer and a faithful content creator, don't you think your work, where you talk about the LDS Church and try to get people to join and extolling their virtues, that is your testimony, that is your witness? There is no difference. Of course, they're paying you for your witness and your testimony. Do you guys have any thoughts about that? I just thought that was...
Is this working okay? Can you hear me? Does this work at all? No, lots of shaking head.
Yeah, no.
Especially when the press packet tells you to bear your witness and how to bear it.
Exactly.
Oh, come on now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And only if you say the lines the way the prompts are told to you that you need to do, are you going to get approved and get paid by us.
Yeah. Right.
So yeah, they're paying you for your testimony to be said in a certain way, to be done with a certain quality, and to avoid certain things.
Yep, that's absolutely correct. And I don't know if you have it up on slides or could pull it up, but I just went through it again, the way that they explain to you that you need to, okay, that's fine, craft things. I mean, they are so specific in what they want you to say. Create a heartfelt montage, share a personal story, and invite them to imagine a connection. And this is a huge theme. Are you lonely? Are you worried? Are you concerned? We can help. Start by sharing a relatable moment of feeling lost or struggling. If that's not crafting a testimony or a witness, I don't know what is. Tell people that they can improve their mental health, emotional health, physical well-being, if they'll be a part of the LDS Church. It just goes on and on. Share a passionate message. So I just think that, again, influencers in the church are giving a response to the wrong question. We are not concerned that people are paid. We understand that people are paid. What our concern is this glimpse behind the scene about what they are being told to say, and the vulnerable people that are watching this and thinking this might be a safe and great space for me. And then, of course, there's a list of do's and don'ts. And one of the things I thought was so fascinating, you know how recently we've all been talking about the rebranding of the LDS Church to be called the Church of Jesus Christ. And Randy Bell did an awesome podcast with us on Mormonish about that whole concept that they're dropping of Latter-day Saints. I've had tons of pushback on this. People have said, that is not happening. I'm like, I think it's happening. I just noticed today, just reminded as I was going over this press packet, that it clearly says in the section that says, do not say, it says, don't mention the words Mormon, LDS, or Latter-day Saint. And then it says, do call it the Church of Jesus Christ. So to me, that says it all. And you know, it's not just the LDS Church. There was an article in the New York Times about all Christian churches turning to social media and trying to make the church look sexy again, right? I was reading about this Catholic priest who's also a bodybuilder. And he does these, these videos from the gym where he's talking about communion while he's benching, and he's got a tank top on. He's not wearing his collar, but everybody is trying to make religion sexy again. and just invite you, just come get baptized, start fresh. That's another line the church is using. They make it sound so simple, and it might be simple up front, right? You come in, you get baptized, then you find out what you're really in for. But I just think we'll see more of it, and I think a lot of the faithful influencers are saying, it's okay, we have a platform, we can speak. But these other influencers they're reaching out to, nobody really knows they're influencers. They're kind of under the radar. They just look like a person like you or me that somebody's going to relate to and listen. And when somebody looks at the camera and says, I'm having a really rough time, somebody's going to go, wow, I am too. And then they say, you know what helped me? Call the missionaries, right? It's just so deceptive to me. I don't know. Do you guys want to weigh in on that?
Sure.
So if I say I'm LDS and I want to bear my testimony to you that my church is true,
I'm not going to listen.
I don't get paid. Is that what you're saying?
Pretty much.
Wow.
You have to share a heartfelt story.
See, this is the problem with the church, is that they micromanage everything, and they ruin everything by micromanaging it. Anybody remember FARMS? The Foundation for Ancient Research and Mormon Studies started up in the latter part of the 1970s by Jack Welch when nobody was looking. And then it became kind of popular in the 80s, and I was a member, and they weren't associated with the church. I mean, obviously it's a faithful organization and they're trying to defend the Book of Mormon, but they're not under the thumb of the church. And then the church came a-calling once they got successful enough. And they said, hey, we'd like to make you part of us. We'd like to put you under the aegis of BYU. What do you think? And the smart people said, no way in hell. And the dumbasses said, wow, what a nice compliment. This is what we've been yearning for our entire life, is to get, those nice strokes from the general authorities. So they went under BYU, and now the church controls them completely.
Do you guys have any questions on this particular story? Okay. Anything else from either of you on that one? I'll just know, Rebecca, please, sorry.
Ganesh is like Donahue.
I love
All
it.
these stories that they're going to be inventing, there's no fact checking. There's another guy who did that a while ago, his name was Paul Dunn.
They don't care if the stories are true. Just follow the standard things they need you to say, and we'll send you the check.
It actually helps if the story's not true. For the LDS Church, truth is a bug, not a feature.
And then Rebecca brought up the point about the church is trying to soften its name to the Church of Christ or the Church of Jesus Christ, and everybody's saying that that's not happening, except, I don't know if you guys caught this, but in the next story that we're going into, let me put it up here on the screen for the YouTube audience. This is about 3 new articles in what I will call the gospel topic essays, but it's part of their questions and answers sections that they've been adding recently. Did you guys notice the subline underneath? This is on the Deseret News. The title of the article is A Look at the Church of Jesus Christ, New Resources on Joseph Smith, Book of Mormon Translation, and Plural Marriage. Right there in the title, they leave off of Latter-day Saints. Another irony, by the way, lots of them tonight. Another irony is that they require of you to use the full name of the church, but they're trying to avoid the full name of the church at all cost. That makes no sense to me at all. And then in the subline, the Church of Jesus Christ announced a new Q&A format resources on Joseph Smith, Book of Mormon. So they say it again. They don't want to use the church's name no matter what when they're the ones saying it.
2 points. Anybody here know what the name of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was on April 6, 1830, when it was organized? The Church of Christ. A few years later, they changed it to the Church of Latter-day Saints. No Jesus. If you look at the Kirtland Temple, which was built and dedicated during that brief time period, you will see there's no Jesus in the title. I expect the church will take care of that. But it's on it, the Church of the Latter-day Saints. And then in 1838, God changed his mind again and said, as long as you've been kicked out of, Ohio and now you're in Missouri, let's make it the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The whole thing. And that's kind of beneficial. It got its own revelation in the Doctrine and Covenants eventually, and it's in there today. The thing is that the Lord in that section is very clear that the name of the church is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And if you're going to be a stickler for the full name of the church and using it as our current president is, the fact is that the Church of Jesus Christ is just as much a violation of the commandment of God as the Church of the Latter-day Saints. It's all or nothing according to God. But they're starting to go Church of Jesus Christ, Church of Christ. And what I think we're doing is witnessing in real time a reversion back to the original name of the church, the Church of Christ.
Yeah, you're seeing it happen in real time. Ganesh, did you have something? I saw a hand.
Well, I was just going to say that one of those released gospel small essays was on the character of Joseph Smith.
Yeah.
And that seems to be in light of a couple of biographies that have just come out, one by John Turner, and then another one just by me. So I'm very excited to read.
Yeah.
Yay,
So the three articles that came out that they're pointing to, as you point out, Ganesh, one is on the translation of the Book of Mormon and questions and answers. One is on the on polygamy and how it was practiced and some questions around how it ended. And then, as you pointed out, the third one is the character of Joseph Smith. Do either of you want to specifically talk about one of those?
I just want to say one thing. It is once said, and I think it's true, I used to read this in my apologetic days, was that it was the 4th century before there were councils before that, but they're trying to figure out how it is Jesus Christ is in relationship with God, and both of them are gods, but there's not more than one God. And they're having these huge councils about it, like 325 CE was a big year. And the word is that everybody else who's not a Christian is looking at these Christians over there and saying, how is it that you've been around for 300 years and you're trying to figure out who God is? Isn't that a little bit late? Shouldn't you have known that before? Like maybe, I don't know, at the beginning? And I was having the same kind of feeling about other people looking at the LDS church and saying, why is it that you've been around for 200 years and you're having another essay with questions and answers about how the Book of Mormon was translated? Didn't you guys already know that? Why is that an issue 200 years after the founding?
When you tell the story one way for 200 years and then in the last 20 try to tell it differently, it might raise a few questions.
Yeah, there is a lot to unpack in those essays, and people are going through them with a fine-tooth comb. Almost every day I'm seeing something new come out. But what really stood out to me, and this should be a feather in RFM's cap, is the essay on polygamy. The first line, in the question, how was polygamy introduced, is Joseph Smith introduced polygamy. It was not Brigham Young. This is a shot across the bow to polygamy deniers. In fact, one of the next lines says, do not deny these historical facts. They are absolutely talking to monogamy affirmers, polygamy deniers. It's like the land of Bizarro. Now that they're going so far to prove that Joseph Smith did introduce polygamy, when even 15 years ago, people didn't really know the extent of what was happening. But here's why it's a feather in RFM's cap. So I'm sure all of you are familiar with the Nauvoo Expositor and the letters, the affidavits written by William and Jane Law and what's the other gentleman? Austin Cal. Yeah, exactly. They wrote affidavits in the Nauvoo Expositor, I'm sure you all know this, saying, yeah, we have seen or been read Section 132. This is real time. And of course, this is what spurred Joseph Smith to have the town council vote to destroy the press and eventually led to all those events. RFM is the one that kind of said, hey, wait a minute. That's a contemporary source right there. They are saying that they saw it. It's not a late source. There's a stamp on that newspaper with the date. This is the smoking gun of Joseph Smith introducing polygamy. Well, if you read a lot of other church sources, they absolutely condemn and damn this paper, don't they? And those affidavits. They have horrible things to say about the people that wrote the affidavits and the affidavits themselves, about the paper, the lies. I mean, there's all kinds of things written. Well, in this new essay, it says Joseph Smith's polygamy is confirmed by, contemporary and very authentic sources. And then there's a little footnote. I'm like, well, what are those contemporary and credible sources? I want to know what those are, because they haven't really mentioned those before. So I go into the footnotes. There it is. The Nauvoo Expositor, those affidavits the church is now using, the once condemned affidavits, I should say, condemned everywhere, they are now using those as proof of Joseph Smith's polygamy. RFM is the one that brought this to light even a couple years ago. So I don't know if you want to talk about that for a minute, RFM, but I thought, yes.
I do.
Thank you very much.
No, it's true. And at the time when I brought it forward, I said, okay, church, if you're going to use this in the future, you need to cite Radio Free Mormon. And they did not. So I'll be filing a complaint here after tonight's show.
Isn't it ironic that the church, up until the year 2013 or 2014, had across its entire correlated curriculum from the founding of the church denied Joseph Smith's polygamy, only to tell us in 2025, do not deny the facts of Joseph Smith's polygamy. You could, prior to the gospel topic essay, specifically the Kirtland and Nauvoo polygamy essay, prior to that moment, there is nowhere in Mormon correlated curriculum. Now, Tim Rathbone will suggest one alternative, which is if you were on the church, had like a newsletter going at the time. And if you got the newsletter, you had an opportunity to order a specialized article or pamphlet. And in that pamphlet, it was mentioned. But the ordinary lay member would have never come across it. Nowhere in the correlated curriculum could you have learned about Joseph Smith's polygamy from a church source in what was approved to be talked about during the 3-hour block of church or any other moment. And now in 2025, they are so concerned about the number of people who are stepping away from orthodox beliefs in Mormonism and moving on to Michelle Stone and those folks that the church now in 2025 says, don't you all dare deny polygamy, although we sure as hell did it for 187 years.
Radio Free Mormon is saving the church from the polygamy deniers. And how strange, really, like you were saying, that newspaper got Joseph Smith killed. Now, the newspaper didn't. His response to it did, obviously. But that newspaper, and especially those 3 affidavits, got Joseph Smith killed. And now they're waving them as their Exhibit A for the truth of the church.
Can I say something? I just wonder if it will be a future Temple Recommend question. Do you believe that Joseph practiced polygamy? And of course, they'll have to ask it of the little, 11-year-olds that they are giving the limited use recommend to. So the other 2 essays, one was on the translation of the Book of Mormon. And I did have a comment on that. And then the other one was on Joseph Smith's character. So, and it's kind of in a question answer format. And they're just taking common questions, that people are asking. And it said, why haven't we seen pictures of the seer stone previous to maybe just like a year or 2 ago, right? Because we all know that. We grew up with Joseph Smith, the golden plates on the table. He's either touching them, right, caressing them, or they're under a cloth, but he's definitely using them. Why not the pictures of the hat and the head buried in the hat? Remember when President Nelson tried to do the little video of it? Remember that? He couldn't even bring himself to do it. He had the hat on the table and he's talking to whatever that female leader was. And he's like, yeah, he would do kind of leaned in. He knew it looked ridiculous. He could not reenact what Joseph did. Anyway, the answer to the question in the essay, why haven't we seen pictures of the seer stone? The answer is something like this. It sort of says, well, the saints in the olden days used to know all about seer stones, and it was perfectly normal, perfectly natural. But then they forgot, and the artists forgot. Everyone forgot. And so the artists, those damn forgetful rogue artists, now we have to add forgetful, they just forgot to draw in the seer stone. But now we know, and you're probably going to see more artwork, but that's not true. The leadership didn't forget. They knew they had that stone. In fact, there's that anecdotal story about President Kimball taking the stone to a BYU history professor and saying, can we reboot this? How do we get this going again? Can you imagine? So just the idea that it's forgetful again, it's just lost, none of that is credible, but that's their answer. So I don't know if you guys have any more comments about translation, and then we can move on to character.
You say lost, I say hidden.
There you
And
go.
there's a question out there.
Yeah, Ganesh asked me, how could you say no if Ganesh asked you to make a comment, right? His wonderful accent. So you mentioned that the church at the time voted to destroy the expositor, right?
Well, the city council.
City council
did that,
Joseph
and then they
Smith was the
destroyed it,
mayor.
Right, and now they're citing it as a resource of politics. So this reminds me of when I read Richard Bushman's Rough Stone Rolling, and then realized that Richard Bushman had cited Fawn Brody all over the place, but the church had destroyed her too. So the church destroys something and then decides, wait, maybe we should use that as a resource after all.
Yep, Michael Quinn is often quoted in things too, and yet he was destroyed by the church. So if it suits them as a resource, they will use it.
Yeah, I was thinking about Michael Quinn too, because if you think of one name about a person who broke open really the story about Joseph Smith and the magic worldview of his time, it's got to be D. Michael Quinn. And the church, when it got done with decades of denial and obfuscation, it decided they were going to write an article that admitted to a lot of it. Where is D. Michael Quinn in the footnotes? I believe he is absent without explanation.
And where is his apology?
Yeah. Well, what does Elder Oaks say, Bill? Can you say it like Elder Oaks for us?
I just wanted to add that the little question answer you just read confirms what D. Michael Quinn is saying.
Yeah.
And they're citing it as evidence. Like, everyone knew about the seer stone. It was natural,
Mm-hmm.
I do want to say one other thing about the polygamy essay, and then we can get into the character of Joseph Smith. And again, I'll put this up for the at-home audience. Does the church?
I was going to say, I was just going to whisper in your
Oh,
ear
yeah.
to pull that up. This is huge.
Does the church teach that plural marriage is required for exaltation? No. No scripture or revelation teaches that plural marriage is a requirement for exaltation.
That's not the question.
Nor has this been, no, it's not. Nor has this been an established doctrine of the church. Not true. For you here and for those at home, there's an episode that RFM and I did for Mormonism Live, which was called Think Celestial. And in that, we tracked all of the documentation for a significant period of time, decades upon decades upon decades upon decades, where the church did teach such. Says how, let me see here. In the 19th century, some church leaders taught this idea. The church does this all the time, where it uses the word some so that the audience thinks one or two, when in reality what they mean is all top 15 leaders of the church across multiple generations. And because it's not the same today as it was then, we're permitted to use the word some.
So I started shaking my head when we got to the word established, all right? Because that's a weasel word. And to put it more specifically, it's a subjective word. If something is established, that's subjective. If it's repeated enough to become whatever established means in the mind of the person who's writing this, well, what we know is that no matter how many decades it was said, and no matter who said it and how high up they were, no matter how clear it was to everybody, It's never going to be established. So whenever you see one of these subjective words put into a sentence, objective, subjective, and that's where all the leeway is, and that's where they're going to have their escape clause.
But this is still a big deal, because up until this moment, the church articulation has been celestial marriage means eternal marriage between one man and one woman, and they deny that this had ever been taught. And when I participated in faithful discussion boards after RFM and I did the Think Celestial episode, I would go into places like Thoughtful Saints, where Jacob Hansen runs the group, and I would put the documentation, and everyone would argue with me that the church never taught that. Maybe it was a member here, but never taught. The essay at least acknowledges within some members during some time period that they don't want to tell us who or when, that it was in fact taught that celestial marriage was a requirement, according to them, at least to some leaders, and that celestial marriage meant plural marriage. It isn't just some modern term that's always meant eternal marriage between one man and one woman.
I can see it, Skip. Thank you. Brian Hales is probably behind this. And Brian Hales, this is a number of years ago. It might be around 10 years ago. This was during my second marriage. My gosh. But he was on a podcast with a couple of other historians, and they're talking about this very issue. And these other historians, so I can't remember their name. There was a gal and a guy. But I remember Brian Hales, because Brian Hales is standing firm on the proposition that it was never taught by the leaders of the church that plural marriage was necessary for exaltation. And the other people are sitting there looking at each other and going, who is this guy? You can't actually mean what you're saying. You must have misspoken inadvertently, because there's all these places. I mean, we know the historical records, and they kept trying to get him. He would not change. And his argument was simply this: regardless of what he wasn't as clear as I'm being, but his argument was, regardless of what any church leader said in the Mormon church, it cannot be required for salvation because it's not required for salvation in the Book of Mormon. Therefore, if it's required for one group of people and not for another group of people, that would not be fair. So therefore, all the church leaders who said it was required for exaltation were wrong. That wasn't really true. And this is why the other two people on the podcast said about Brian Hales that it appeared that he was more interested in arguing theology than history. And that's what Brian Hales does. If you're watching, Brian, that's you, okay? You argue theology the way you think should be instead of history, which is the way things were and are.
And so then we get to this third article, which is on the character of Joseph Smith. And what all I'll say about it is the entire article essentially says, yes, Joseph Smith may have done some things that we don't really look fondly upon, but only trust us as a source. Don't look other places. Don't read what the bad guys say about the church. Don't listen to critics. Everyone out on the internet is saying really horrible things. Don't you be one of those.
Yeah, I just was so intrigued by the title, Joseph Smith's character. And I even said to Ganesh, I feel like they're writing these essays with your book in mind, or John Turner's. These have just come out and they're like, oh, we got to put something out here. But from the very beginning of that essay, it just talks about how he's imperfect. And God works through imperfect people. He's made mistakes. It just sounds so minor, like he forgot to take the trash out or something and Emma's upset. We've all made mistakes, trying to make him an everyman like all of us. Who are we to judge? None of us have done what he did systematically, purposely. We could go on and on, but yeah, the whole tone is very misleading yet comforting, I would say, to a faithful reader. Just he's imperfect, but none of us are perfect, and God works through imperfect people. Of course he does. So it's a big nothing burger as far as even addressing any of the things that everyone in this room knows what we're talking about when we mention Joseph Smith's character.
But if you put them all together, we know one of the things that Joseph Smith did that wasn't bad was polygamy.
I believe.
In other words, the thing that most people look at and say, you got to be kidding me, you did what? Well, they got an essay that's coming out on that at the same time saying, yeah, Joseph Smith did it and ain't it grand.
I'll add to that. If you're truly going to help an audience evaluate the character of your founding leader, you have to tell the audience point by point what it is that he did that might raise concerns, and then inform the audience to the point where they can make the judgment themselves. Anything else you want to say about this story? No. What do you guys have going on this coming week? And then I've got something else I just want to add, and then we can sort of work towards closing out the show and enjoy the rest of the time here with our in-studio audience.
Wow, great.
Anything else from you guys?
No, not for me.
No, I think it's been great. Are we going to take any kind of questions
Yep.
about any news stories? Awesome.
Let's do
great.
that.
Let's
So if
do it.
anybody has a question, please raise your hand. Before we get to that, I want to say something. RFM and I had an event Saturday night. And Rebecca, you were there, but you left a little bit before it ended.
Yeah, I did.
Which was unfortunate because one of the things that RFM and I told the audience, and we'd like to give you guys a chance to appreciate Rebecca, is that what you don't know what happens behind the scenes every week is that Rebecca really is the Mormon Newscast. And every week she reaches out to RFM and I to keep us in line by sending us the stories that are in the news, creating conversation starting points where him and I can talk about these things with her. And she ensures that all through the week that we are getting ready for the Mormon Newscast, because often we won't pick our story until Monday morning, but it's because of Rebecca's hard work all week long that makes it really easy for RFM and I. So yes, please, a grand applause for Rebecca Biblioteca.
In other words, I just harassed the hell out of them so we can have a good show. So, no, they're amazing to work with. These guys are the absolute best, and we have so much fun doing this. I hope that comes through in the broadcast. But we have a great friendship, a great camaraderie, and we're really dedicated to putting out good content to help people, work through things. And it's important to us, and we care. We really care about our audience and about everybody. So,
Yeah. Especially for all of us who have left Mormonism and just can't leave it alone.
I was gonna say to you guys, we were at that show on Saturday, it was fabulous. And somebody said something in the audience when they were going around introducing themselves, which I thought was fantastic. And that was, they thank you for all that you do. And then they said, you guys make it easy for us to push the easy button to understand what's happening in the church currently and in the past, and then give your thoughts on it. So I say thank you, and I repeat, whatever that person said to me was just spot on. So thank you.
Thank you.
And I didn't leave early. In fact, I was out there on the street talking to people, and the security had to come and grab me and drag me away because it was so late. Yes, well, I was where the people were.
Details.
So as perhaps the lone nevermo in the audience, Rebecca, isn't there any temple news?
Oh, let me think. Oh, okay. This is an interesting temple news. I'll tell this here. So as often happens to me, I run into people and they just tell me things. It's really weird. I'm kind of a magnet. And I also do work the system. Like, I think I just look really sweet and innocent, so people reveal things to me. But I was at an event about a week or so ago, and somebody walked past me and said, Rebecca? I'm always startled when I'm recognized, but so I'll be very vague here. But starting to talk to this person, and they had a relative that was in a position in the church internationally to know things about temples. Somebody who was pretty high up, a facilitator, somebody in a diplomatic role. And I'll just be vague like that, but this person told me, who had learned it from this person higher up, that there actually is a working, functioning temple in Russia. Now, it was announced years ago and nothing ever happened, but according to this strange source, and I don't know if it means that there's like a house where maybe there's, some things set up or something, but they said, oh no, and it's through actual channels, but there is something there. So I'm trying to find out more if anybody knows more. But as far as the other temple news here in the US, we're just waiting on that district court in Fairview in the resident suit. And people email me all the time, and I have to say, in some places, temples are going in and they're welcomed and people are fine. And they're doing a better job of adhering to the codes and ordinances. And I wish the church would look at those areas where there's no pushback and say, I wonder why there isn't any pushback, and maybe do the same as some of these other towns. But there will always be temple news, and we'll keep everybody updated, won't we?
You will. Absolutely.
I'm just wondering, as content creators, right, for content that is maybe associated with the church, do you ever fear or are worried about
Never.
repercussions or some sort of retaliation from somebody, or maybe ever worried about that or
That's real.
In a church that has a strengthening church members committee, DESNAT, Whistling Whittlers, Blood Atonement, Avenging Angels, Danites, and $265 billion to sue your ass. No. I think when you get into this line of work, you're a truth teller at whatever cost that comes. And I've told RFM before, I've told others, there's reason, I think, with our church's history to be a little nervous. And I've sometimes have had thoughts in my head about the kind of past this church has, like what level of violence might they do today if they needed to. But I've never lost a moment of sleep, and I don't expect that either of you have either.
No, in fact, I'm so unconcerned about that I'm willing to go in front of a live audience such as yourselves in a publicly advertised meeting without a bulletproof vest.
Yeah, they might be afraid of the wrong people.
That could be it. I just know that every time they do go after a content creator, like the most recent, I would say maybe a Julie Hanks or something, the ripple effect is out there. And I think it does way more harm to them than whatever they thought they could accomplish. I think even faithful members look at it and go, oh, that person was helping me. That person wasn't negative. And when those people are shut down, I think it causes even, nuanced members to go, wait, this is not cool. This church is not good. So I don't know, but I mean, I do think about it. My platform is not as big as these guys, and I'm not a lawyer, right? So of course you think about it, and you just hope you can keep doing it as long as you can. But yeah, I think they shoot themselves in the foot when they go after these people that are beloved and sympathetic figures and people that are trying to do good. Like I said, Julie Hanks comes to mind, and some of the other recent ones that resigned. So I think that's a wake-up call for some people.
Yeah. One of the big things that ended up leading me out of the church, though my name's still on the records, it's more performance than anything else, but was when they excommunicated John DeLynn. I listened to John DeLynn for a number of years. I'd gotten to know where he stood. I liked where he stood. I appreciated the thought that he put into different issues. And the problem was with him is that when the church excommunicated John DeLynn, it sent a clear message to me, and I remember thinking this more than once. If there isn't room enough in the church for John DeLynn, then there isn't room enough in this church for me either. And that's a message that came through loud and clear.
Yep.
Did you get that message at all?
I was going to say, my co-host on Mormonish Landon, who's here in the back, he had a similar experience as he was just kind of being nuanced and trying to find a way to stay in because of mixed faith scenarios. And he was watching John DeLynn, and he's like, oh, here's a guy, and he was even recommended to him. Here's a guy that can tell you kind of how to navigate it and how to stay in. I think he'd only watched a few podcasts and then realized, oh, they just excommunicated him. So yeah, he was doing so much good for people that were trying to navigate that very delicate balance. And then to be cast out, it sent a very clear message. And I think that continues.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
So going back to that polygamy story with Joseph Smith, that just reminded me of a YouTube short that I saw with Rebecca talking about and mentioning Fanny Albert. And I just thought that was interesting how, of course, they don't talk about the barn. And I'm sure that that was strategic by the church. It just made me think of that. Like, they want to get that name out there so that if people hear it, they're like inoculated by it and they don't look into and learn about the affair in the barn. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, did you guys come across that where they said that his first plural wife is Fanny Alger and he did get permission from the parents to marry her? And then there's a whole set of resources that are kind of circular. So I would like somebody to look into that, honestly. I mean, he did have permission from the parents for her to work in his home. Maybe in his mind, that also means work in the barn. I don't know, but have either of you heard that
Not
he,
really.
you know, and the common person reading it is going to go, oh, right, you know, he got permission and there it is. But so many other places list someone else as his first plural wife. So you're absolutely right. This is new. They're trying to dial it back, recreate it, spin it, that no, this was a legitimate plural wife. And I don't know how they're doing that.
I'll tell you that 35 years ago, when I moved from Texas to Washington permanently, there was a gal in our ward whose name is Stacy, though whose last name I won't bother mentioning. She might even be watching the show right now. She got turned on to it recently. Hi, Stacy. Whose brother-in-law had a rock band, a small rock band and a local rock band whose name was Fanny Alger. Except they probably said Fanny Alger. That was the first time I ever heard the name. And it was still decades before I found out about what went on in that bar.
Yes.
Yeah, this is a question for RFM. My brother's a big fan of yours. He wasn't able to be here tonight. He got me into listening to you a few years ago, and if he was here, I know he would want to ask you, how do you do your hair?
That reminds me of an old joke that people used to say to me in high school. Who does your hair? General Electric? Nothing cleans quite like steel woolen soap. That was the old Brillo comment that I get. That's how I know what their slogan was back in the 1970s. I still hear it in my nightmares. No, that's about it. You know, I wash, I dry, I towel dry and put a little gel in the hair. And then if it's kind of short, it's shorter now. I finally got my 6-month haircut a few weeks ago. And that only happens when Wendy really leans on me for a long period of time to get it. Because the wonderful thing about my hair is that if you don't do that, you see, when it's short, you can put the gel on. I hope this is really, really interesting to everybody other than your brother.
I'm taking notes.
And then you do this thing, right? You do this thing you could never do when I was a kid. Just blah, blah, blah. And then it's go time. But when it gets longer and longer, it uses more and more gel, and they use more and more brush. And it kind of all looks the same, really. So that's the answer.
So is the church made any official lineup? Is Emma still considered Joseph's first wife, even though he gets sealed to her until like number 22?
Great question.
Yeah, there's no place in the correlated curriculum where it names what number Emma was in terms of sealings, and every reference is that Emma Smith is his first wife. But for those who, again, what she's pointing to, not only did she not know about, I'm going to say most of the sealings as they were happening, but she wasn't sealed to Joseph Smith until after 21 or 22 other women had been sealed to him. And so she's the 22nd or 23rd wife sealed to him, which is such a strange thing.
You know, we've got these new essays, and I'm not going to do this, okay, but I think it'd be fun, would be to have a race to see how well they buried them on their own website. And just have everybody hold up their phone and go, all right, go, and see who can find these things first.
One comment about Emma that just reminds me, when I was growing up, Emma was a villain. She was not really talked about, or there was something wrong. We didn't know. She was just, you don't talk about her. Something had happened. She had lost her testimony or left the church. You just didn't really know. It wasn't clear. And for some people, even into adulthood, they were like, yeah, what is it with Emma? Then suddenly, they decided it had to be a love story. I don't know if you remember the movie, the Legacy movie on Temple Square. It was this beautiful love story. And this is how it's always portrayed now. Although we have all these other resources showing us that, she had the most difficult life. It was just horrendous. And I mean, I know we talk about, did she love him? I think she probably did, but it's a very complex thing. But I don't know if any of the rest of you kind of grew up thinking of her as a villain or just not in the picture. And then suddenly, love story, right? You have a lot of artwork showing them together, young love. And I don't know, that just bothers me, this narrative crafted about, this woman. When will we get, the real story, the real Emma?
The only story I heard about Emma before I went on my mission, so that means my first year and a half or so in the church, and I heard it more than once, was the quote from Brigham Young, who was talking about Joseph Smith. And Brigham Young saying, I heard Joseph Smith say that I would go to hell for a woman like Emma, and he was going to have to. Anybody heard that before?
Yes. That was Brigham that said it.
This makes me think of something, which is we've mentioned the polygamy deniers tonight, and we give them a lot of grief at times because I don't think they follow the data in a way that a critical thinker would and logically work through what sources to trust and which ones not to and how to interpret certain historical pieces of documentary history. But I want you to recognize how important they are at this moment, because one of the things we never want to do is silence anyone. We want people on all sides to be able to at least state their view. Now, they may not have a full seat at the table if their view is absurd. Like, we wouldn't let flat earthers into the science conference and give them equal time to say things. But I think it's important that they be allowed to have their voice. And by them having their voice, the church is forced into a different direction, which is they now have to prove to the general audience that Joseph Smith did in fact practice polygamy. And if you see the Clayton journals released in the next couple of years, it will be because of the church's feelings about the polygamy deniers. And so I just want you to recognize, when it comes to things like free speech or the ability to have different perspectives, we on this side of things should always fight for everybody to have some sort of seat at the table, even if their views are absurd, because often it's the church reacting to those who are pulling people out of orthodoxy, at least modern moment orthodoxy, as the church defines it, that will often lead to the church releasing things like the 1886 revelation to John Taylor, for instance, that just came out. And the Joseph Smith Papers Project, what it is in response to are folks among the questioning or critical ex-Mormons, questioning Mormons or critical ex-Mormons, who are asking about these historical issues and demonstrating with their side of evidence that the church isn't being honest, and the church wanting to deal with that often is releasing history that they would never have wanted to release at any other moment in time.
Yeah, I have a question. How many of you know somebody who is a monogamy affirmer or polygamy denier? Yeah, I think we're not even aware of how many people hold these views, some more vocally than others, but some silently in their wards. It is a huge and growing movement in the church, and I think the evidence is the release of these things where they flat out say, you must believe that Joseph Smith practiced polygamy. We never would see that without this growing movement. And I mean, I get comments all the time on my Facebook page or when I put out a short or a video. They are evangelizing their point of view everywhere. And so they're among us. I will say that. You would probably be shocked in any given average ward how many people sitting there actually hold those views and do try to kind of insert them into conversations or talk to people they feel might be a little receptive to them. It's very interesting to watch this growing movement and what it's doing to the LDS Church as far as how they have to react.
And I also think it's important to note that I have much more agreement in ethics and morals with a polygamy denier than I do with a fair Mormon apologist. Because at least me and the polygamy denier, where we agree, where their crux is that they are deeply uncomfortable and bothered by Joseph Smith's alleged behavior. I say alleged because that's how they would frame it. Alleged behavior in how he carried out polygamy, whereas the fair apologist simply dismisses or defends it. And so I can at least sit with the polygamy denier and acknowledge that, hey, you and I, if Joseph Smith's polygamy is true, you and I are both really uncomfortable on a moral level with who Joseph Smith was and how he behaved. Whereas the other side isn't bothered at all. They just acknowledge, like, that's true and who cares? And that to me is atrocious.
Yes. So why is it so important for the church to come down against the polygamy deniers?
Because their influence is growing exponentially. And they're huge.
Yeah.
This is like the early church having to deal with the Gnostics among them, which is the problem is they look like everybody else. And there's no way to weed them out. And while they're amongst the congregation and the flock, they're leading them astray from the church's point of view. Because of course the correlation to Joseph Smith did not practice polygamy is that Brigham Young did and made it all up and wrote it back into history and pinned it on Joseph Smith as its author, which means that really Brigham Young and everybody past him are in a horrible state of apostasy. And that leads right up to the current president of the church. And most people can see that. I think Michelle Stone has not allowed herself to see that very clearly yet, and she may never. But if you believe that, you really cannot, I think, reasonably remain a member of this church and raise your hand when you're sustaining the apostles. And the first presidency, two of whom are married to more than one woman in the eternities.
The very definition of polygamy denier is that you believe the Brighamite faction went into some sort of apostasy.
Yeah, which is why maybe I'm not joking about a temple recommend question saying that you believe that Joseph Smith was a polygamist. And it's interesting to kind of trace these very almost deliberate, it seems like, steps the church has made recently. And you guys, we've talked about this and might have noticed it, just to kind of reaffirm polygamy. It kind of started out with the polygamy cartoon, right? We're going to tell kids about this and we're going to say it's hard, but they had to do it. And sometimes you might have to do something hard. I mean, that was interesting. Then we have all of a sudden the John Taylor revelation. Did we ever think that would suddenly be pulled out of the vault, right? There it is. We have temporary commandments. They tell us all of a sudden that things that were before aren't anymore, but could they be again? We don't know. We have President Oaks letting it slip very deliberately, heavenly mothers. You know, and now we have this essay where it clearly says Joseph Smith did introduce polygamy. So I've never seen such pro-polygamy rhetoric coming from the church as I have in the last year. And maybe I'm putting together dots that don't, follow, but to me, I think that they do. Whatever it means or wherever it means we're going, it's a pro-polygamy stance we've never seen before.
Yes, and you listed off a bunch more than I could have remembered, Rebecca, but let's not forget that the church used its force to silence Michelle Stone. And you don't do that if you're not scared about somebody's influence. And whatever her religious beliefs are, and whatever she believes about the church today, she believes it enough to allow herself to be silenced by their threats.
Great point. Yes.
In all of this new updated discussion about polygamy, has there been any reference to the law of Sarah and why none of it is followed? Like our prophets that are marrying women after their first wife has died, there's been no selection by the first wife. Emma obviously did not approve of any of the following wives, even if it was a false power to say that or be damned, it still wasn't given an option. Is it ever discussed?
Isn't it ironic that Section 132 lays out the laws of polygamy, and on all three, and actually one of them means two things. That is that one has to be a virgin, which also means she can't be married, and so polyandry. But that all three rules in Section 132 are broken in not only 3, but 4 different ways. So Joseph has a revelation from God saying, yeah, we can do polygamy, but it has to be done this way. And in all 3 instances, Joseph violates that, as do the prophets who immediately follow him. Yeah, that is strange.
I was going to say, it's actually the opposite, the exact opposite of the law of Sarah. If Emma doesn't go along with it, she'll be destroyed. You know, lip service maybe is asked, but it doesn't matter. It has no real weight because she has to go along with it or she's destroyed.
Yeah, I'm sorry. And I think everybody knows, if you've read past verse 26 in the section 132 of the Doctrine and Covenants, by the way, which the church does not want you to read past. Back in 2006 to 2010, I was the gospel doctrine teacher, and there's a teacher's manual, and it says you only go this far. And I think it said the same thing in the student's manual at the time. And everybody's very happy to have less scripture to read. But I think there's a reason behind it. And as crazy as it sounds, what Bill's talking about is absolutely true if you haven't read it. God Almighty tells Emma and every other woman in her position that you have the absolute right to give a thumbs up or a thumbs down vote on any choice that your husband makes of a second or subsequent wife. But if you go thumbs down, then you're going to be destroyed. Sounds fair enough, doesn't it?
Next. Is that it? All right.
All right.
Maybe it's time to
We're going to end the show. Please hang around. Obviously, you guys will mingle here a little longer. We've got until 10 p.m. Otherwise, to the folks in the YouTube audience, we're going to end the stream now. Thank you so much for participating in the Mormon Newscast.